All right, so what we're going to cover today is a quick look at how I go about creating these profile designs. Let me get rid of this real fast. There we go. So for your hard surface modeling class, we're looking at creating orthographic views. Orthographic view meaning a front view and a side view. It could also mean top view, back view, left, right, any view that doesn't have perspective, essentially. So in doing these assignments, it's important to first consider your profile. So you notice that right now I'm in Photoshop. Our end product will eventually be in Illustrator, just so we can keep things really nice and clean and on a grid, scale things out real good. So, but I like to sketch in Photoshop or on paper first. Obviously, since I can't record paper, it's easier for me to do Photoshop. So I'm going to start off with a fairly large brush. So I'm going to crank the size of this guy up. You notice it's not a fancy brush by any means. This is just a circle. All right, so nothing too crazy. And I've pulled up some reference onto my other monitors so that I can get an idea of some shape language that I'm interested in. So for this assignment, we're talking about temples. It helps often when you're doing this kind of work, and this is something I tend to do, where I'll write what I'm about to draw up here. So I'm going to start off with a temple. Let me get a cleaner brush here. This thing isn't good for handwriting. So I'm working on a temple. You notice my opacity is way down currently. That's fine. I can also crank it back up. For writing, it doesn't really much matter as long as I can read it. So I'm going to be working on a temple, and then I have to think about what aspects do I like about this temple. You know, is it a temple for some evil god? Is it what kind of artistic aspects as well? You know, so I want to know art style, and I want to know story, right? So I'm going to go with, in this case, an owl god. And this, if you guys were in my second class last week, this will be similar to what we did for that class, which was just kind of off-the-cuff design work. So I was going to kind of go with that. So we have a temple. It's for an owl god. Our art style, I want it to be kind of chunky. I want to think World of Warcraft. I want the general feel, the general shape language to be made up of circles and squares. All right, so that's going to be important. If I have a lot of triangles inside my world opposed to circles and squares, triangles are going to give me a different feel, right? This really sharp top has more of an aggressive feel to it than a circle. The circles are going to feel a little bit more balanced. They still can have a strength to them, but they're friendlier as shapes go. The squares, those have a very construction-based feel to it, a very solid, grounded feel to them, right? Whereas these guys, if you're doing bad guys, you go with sharper shapes, and basically that means you go with triangles, lots of spikes. Now you can also pair up these two, right, triangles with cubes, and you can still get that pretty evil feel. All right, so we're going to go with the circles and the squares. All right, so I want a temple primarily made up, I would say, of some large chunky bricks, and then we'll use some circle motifs in it to make it feel nice and peaceful. All right, so there's a few interesting tools that we can use for the beginning of this setup process. The first thing I want to do is pull down a nice ground plane. So if I'm drawing this thing, I want to know where my dirt is. So let's say that it's right there. I generally also want a center plane. So I'm just going to pull it actually into the center of my canvas. And then if you're in one of the later versions of Photoshop, if you come up here while you're inside of your brush tool, you'll see that you have a symmetry tool. All right, I'm going to come down here and grab this vertical symmetry tool. All right, now what this is going to do, as long as I can hit enter or that check mark, which I just hit, and this is going to allow me to draw on both sides at the same time. That way I really only have to work over on the right hand side, and then I can still get my drawing done pretty quickly. All right, now I'm going to work on interesting shape language first, and then in doing shape language, I kind of don't want to have, I'm going to hide this symmetry tool, I know it's going to be right here. I don't want to have a tiny little brush, because this tiny little brush is good for getting into tiny little details. All right, right now we're not at detail stage. All right, right now we're at big swatches of shape stage. So I'm going to crank this dude up a bit, and we're going to start working on a big shape language. All right, so we talked about the owl god. So I want to start thinking about this circle. How do I incorporate it into this wall? We had ourselves an interesting little bit of shape language going the other day, where we had a shape very similar to this. All right, and then we came straight down in here, and then this shape was echoed down below as another circle, and then from here we came in and we created some really large horns coming out through here, a little bit of something like that, and then we wanted to start coming in and cutting back in. I'm going to hit X to flip back over here. So this was like a bit of a fountain, right? So we had this little bit of design language coming down through here, and I'm just using black and white to cut in and cut out of these shapes presently. Just refining them ever so slightly. If we like this and we want to carry this over, I can hit X again. Maybe we want to pull this out again. Maybe we keep it chunkier so that we don't go into triangles, right? And then I'm going to hit M real fast. Grab all of that. And then Control T. I'm going to scale this thing down from the center. So I'm just going to hold my Alt. Scales down from the middle, like so. And because of my selection, I'm going to have to bump this guy over a little bit to make sure I'm still centered up. That'll work. And hit enter. There we go. Hit Control D, gets me out of the dancing ants, out of that selection. I hit my Z, kind of zoom in here. Now, obviously, my selection moved off of my ground plane. That's fine for now. What I'm wanting to do is build this back into a ground plane, so I'll end up moving this around a few times. I just want a consistent place for that to exist. Alright. Now, this here, let me lower this down just a little bit. This is just my basic profile. Alright, so these are just ideas. Oops. Maybe I've got some sort of liquid, some water pouring down. Then that comes into a bowl of sorts. Right? X. So this bowl, maybe it's part of this whole back area here. So I'm just thinking about, I'm still really thinking about shape language. And this water pours out of this. So let's think about what we have going on up here as well. You want to work the entire image all at once. Maybe we've got a second circle coming up through here. Something that's a little finer. Maybe that thing's connected 2 or 3 spots. I like 3. Feels a little nicer. And I'm just using, like I said, the black and the white to cut in and cut out. I'm going to keep this thing right here floating. And then I think I'm going to pull some sort of construct around through here, some sort of secondary shape. I'm still trying to stay chunky in my design, right? And this is all just really fast shape design. There's nothing fancy going on. You notice I'm not getting in here, I'm not drawing out individual bricks, none of that stuff. I'm just drawing some really, really basic forms. Alright. Now, we got something in here. Let's see, am I still? Yeah, I'm in black. Lower this down real fast. Something else. Crank that up. There we go. So I want to start getting an idea of what I want. If I'm happy with certain areas, you'll see I come in, kind of clean little bits up. Maybe this is chopped out like that in order to allow for, if we think this is going to be a bowl, allow for that bowl to pour. Maybe this is some sort of life fountain or something, right? This is some sort of life energy pouring out of this little bit right here. Now I'm going to come in here, I'm going to put some giant eyes right there. I'm going to track that shape a few tiny more times. I'm just going to do placement of that one. I'm going to try to keep these equidistant. Or something like that. Alright, that's kind of neat. So I'm still mostly rounded shapes. Still generally pretty chunky in its form. I want to think about what is this thing being housed in. Remember, we're doing temples and stuff for our current project. So perhaps this temple has, maybe this is like a giant ornament inside of this temple, and then it's high up above everything else, right? So maybe this thing has some massive chunks of stone or rock wall that come out from it. Maybe this thing is the peak, and you have outside of here, maybe this sticks up, and then outside of here you have some sort of massive structure, right? It's old, perhaps it's old and ruined. Right. You have, I'm just quickly sketching in the idea of some walls, just so I can get a feel for how this potentially could look. Right. Perhaps this comes way back through here. This is all part of this big, thick chunk of stone, right? And these bits are all maybe made out of, I don't know, gold or brass, right? And then maybe this bit right here, and come back in here, maybe this is a giant collection bit, like a pool. It's just embedded into the wall. Right? And kind of tracks through the back of that wall right there. Same angle as the water splashing down into it. Cut a little bit of that back out. Cut that in. Maybe it's got some sort of the inverse of that. We could do I'm just thinking about shape design. All right. I think that pretty much does that. Shrink this down just a little bit. Now, all this stuff, this additional wall stuff that I added in, that is mostly just so I can get a feel for the overall environment, right? Doesn't necessarily have to be something you stick with or finalize. So what does this represent, or where do I go with this? Well, let's say this whole piece right here is one chunk that needs to be modeled. Let's say this whole Fountain base is another piece that needs to be modeled. Well, there's a few things we have to understand. A, what does this thing look like from the side? So I could come in, model this whole thing, or draw this entire thing out from a side perspective, top perspective, to get a feel for what's going on. The other issue is, what size is this compared to your average human, right? Is this thing, so if I have this right here, and go ahead and scale this down like this. So I could have to where this is some tiny little area inside of the building. So perhaps my guy is this big. Let me turn off else if I turn this off real fast. Symmetry off. There we go. Yeah, so like I said, perhaps my human is this tall. This is your adventure guy. If so, and this thing's like basically 6 foot tall, right? Because your average adventure guy, basically a 6 foot tall dude, or a 2 meter tall dude, or dudette, right? Or perhaps this dude or dudette is much smaller. Maybe they're down here. And they're looking up at this thing. Maybe they're even smaller than that. Maybe this thing is a monstrous statue. Right? So you have something along these lines. Well, clearly, you're going to have a far different story to tell. There we go. This is a far more epic shot right here. If this guy shows up and this is the temple that he's been looking for, maybe climbs to the top of a mountain, well, this is going to be far more appealing. One, from an illustration standpoint, but if this is a game, you're going to get, I think, as a game player, a lot more experience from something like this than you are if this guy was the same height. Same height, this is just an accent on the wall that you walk past. At this size, which is, probably 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times this guy's height, at 6 foot, you're looking at a 36 foot structure. That's huge. So you'd have to walk in some monstrous doors just to see this. All right. So pretty interesting. From here, I would decide on the exact scale. I actually kind of like this setup here. And I would draw out the same way I did before, but now with accent lines, or I'm sorry, not accent, guidelines. So I would start pulling out guides like these, mark the main areas of detail. So notice I'm just coming through, I'm finding the places in my design that are really important. Tops, the bottoms of some of the main landmarks, the big swooshy bits. Probably need this guy right here. Alright, that way I can figure that out. I would want to know where this thing is, whatever that thing is. Let's say that that's where the water comes from. Right? Maybe there's even extra holes in here. Just like this, right? I'm not going to turn that on. But maybe there's some sort of large hole that the water comes out of, right? That could be interesting. Maybe there's multiple holes. Boom. Boom. So I'm playing with positive and negative form inside of here, right? I could continue doing that if I wanted to. Let me grab this vertical guy and put this right there. That looks about right. Hit enter. So maybe I even cut in further. So I start doing something like this. I could do the same thing over here if I chose. Maybe I don't like that, so I just undo it, call it a day. Maybe I just like this here. All right. I could refine all that. Zoom back out a little bit. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of neat, right? So we have these little bits and pieces that cut in, cut out. Now, it was also asked, what's the level of detail that I need to know? Well, it doesn't have to be hyper realistic. You don't have to get in here and texture this thing out or anything along those lines. But it is good to understand what this thing is made of and its general structure, and refine these bits so that you're not getting these weird paint over lines. So how would I do that? Well, what I would do is I would make another layer. I would take this first layer, and I would take this dude down a bit. Right now it was set to background, so I couldn't affect its opacity or anything like that. So let me do this. Let me grab this guy. I'm going to drag. I'm going to grab that guy, drop that down there. I'm going to hit G real fast, fill that background with white. Make a layer on top. This is going to be my sketch layer. I'm going to lock that guy so I don't draw on it. This guy right here, I'm going to drop down to, say, 20-something%. That way I can see it in the background, but I don't necessarily, I'm just using it as a reference at this point, right? And I'll lock that so I don't draw on that. I'm going to get myself a smaller pen. You don't have to use any fancy brushes, anything along those lines. Just as long as you can come in here and get some of the basic reads pretty nicely. The B key on this laptop is messed up, so every time I hit brush, it just looks at me. Alright. I'm going to go with this guy. Now right now we're in pretty low res because this is a pretty small drawing still. You could, and it would be a good idea, to come in here and increase your canvas size or your overall image size. I like the canvas size itself, but not the, as in the canvas aspects. But I don't really particularly like the fact it's only 2,000 by 2,000. So it is nice to sketch this small because your sketches won't take up very much memory. But if you're going to start adding in details, I would suggest that you go up to something along the size of 4K to 6K. So maybe I knock this out at 6,000 pixels. Serve details. Come in here and say OK.